All right, welcome to the archive, James. It's good to see you here. It's kind of funny interviewing you now because a few years ago, when I was a college student and you had a store in Cambridge still, I walked in a couple of times and I was trying to act like I knew what I was looking at when I wandered around your store.
Yeah, you mentioned that, and you know what? You never know what you're looking at. That's what my whole job's about. Trying to figure out what I'm looking at is
All
the
right,
the most fun thing about my books.
that's cool. That's cool. So do you sell like handwritten books?
I do. I sell manuscripts as well. I
Mhm.
don't have any right now,
Okay.
because I sell them,
Yeah, yeah.
but I do buy a lot of books that have annotations in them. And in a way, you're getting two books for one. You're getting um, a book that somebody wrote and printed, and a book that somebody read and wrote what they were reading about. And I really love those. And it makes every single printed book unique if you write notes in them.
Okay, that's really neat. So it's kind of like somebody's commentary or notes
Yeah.
about reading the book. Wow, that's pretty cool. Tell me like what's the oldest book you've sold so far?
I've had things from the 11th century.
11th century. What was like what was
Uh,
in there? What are they
so
about?
that was commentaries on the Bible.
Okay,
And I sold it to a Bible museum,
cool.
and I didn't have it very long, so it was pretty exciting. Most of the books that I sell are 1450 to 1700,
Okay.
and probably the greater part of my stock is before 1500. So in that 50 or so years.
Wow. Okay. That's really unique. 1100 a commentary on the Bible. Um, so were like the Bibles written in 1100 different than or how different from like do you know
Yeah.
how different they might have been?
So a lot of times people would have gospel books, which would just be sort of the New Testament or sections of the Old Testament. But as far as having the whole Bible, there weren't a lot of them at that time.
Okay.
Around a couple hundred years later, around 1250, you start seeing complete Bibles with the Old Testament and the New Testament and the Psalms.
Okay, that's interesting. A lot of like I always try to read like the earliest scriptures possible. So like things that people might find out of like the Nag Hammadi library or the Nag Hammadi scriptures with the earliest gospels we have from the disciples written in there. So that was pretty interesting that really up until the 1400s, Bibles used to be really incomplete.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty neat that it's very easy to see how the text changes and how complicated um, the history of the Bible is,
Mhm.
and it's always been that way. And um, I don't focus so much on the Bible as I do the histories that were written about um, the histories of the churches and their relationship with the text.
Mhm.
So it becomes like a meta.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, like, with the edits in your theory, do you think they pertain to the changes that happen? Is it related to the politics of the day as to
Oh,
what shifts?
sure. There was lots of councils held on which books uh, to include in the canonical Bible. So um, even as late as the King James Bible, 1611, the first edition has the Apocrypha in it, and the second and preceding ones don't. So sometime around 1611, they decided, like, oh, let's not put the Apocrypha in. No one's going to read that. But what made it the Apocrypha, goes back to, I think, the Council of Constance. So a long time earlier.
Okay.
So the Bible's never really a solid thing. It's always a moving target, and there's no like getting to the bottom of it, I think.
Sometimes reading like the history of certain things like the Bible as an example, the way it plays out, sometimes it's almost like this comedy. It was
Uh-huh.
it's like, how should it's like what's going on? How can we use this to help try and keep the peace or deal with this situation?
Right. And there's um, you know, something that I've always wanted to fool around with. It was just to write uh, a history made up of the changes in the Bible that happened because of typos.
Oh my god. How many changes happen because of typos?
Oh, there's lots of typos. So there's the Bible called the Breeches Bible because they said that Adam discovered he was wearing breeches or breeches, however you want to pronounce it. Um, you know, and there's another Bible called the Wicked Bible where it says that you shall commit adultery instead of thou shall not commit adultery. And the first edition of the King James Bible, it refers to Ruth as he instead of she. You know, that's a strange one too.
Oh my god. That's funny. That is really funny. The typos made that would be a really good book to read. That would be.
It would be fun, and you know, the Moses with the horns is like one of those things that it was a typo and it just stuck, and all of a sudden people are like making paintings and drawings of it, and then it becomes woodcuts and representations of it, and all of a sudden I feel like you want to know who that guy is. If he's got horns, it's Moses. And out of that comes this cultural bias that, you know, if you're Jewish you have horns. You know, it just one little slip of a couple of letters made all that happen.
Oh my god. Wow, that's crazy. That is wild how one little typo has such a huge effect, like in
Mhm.
written word, how it has an effect on the world.
Right.
So, aside from Bibles, like what were other books that people were reading?
um so the Middle Ages is just, you know, referred to as the Dark Ages, but in fact it's such a rich time for church fathers writing about church histories that are wonderful, from uh, Eusebius writing a chronicle of, you know, all of time, and then Saint Augustine writing the City of God, which is a description of the city of man in relationship to the city of God and what man's history is. And then they um, have this a guy that Orosius comes after Saint Augustine, and Augustine wants him to write a continuation of the city of God, and he calls it a history against the pagans. And it's just an incredible book that so few people know about it. In it, he goes through and sets out a almost like an ethics of what uh, the second century Christians should be like, which became the foundation of Dante's Inferno. And he like picks out all these things from Orosius, and including like just blatantly just taking big paragraphs and using them and changing them into verse in the Inferno. And in Orosius's book, he also talks about how the Christian religion spread from the Holy Land, you know, through uh, the the Italian forces, and then they in Constantinople and all the way up until Ireland. And he's the first person to describe Christianity being in Ireland. So those kind of things are really interesting. And I have a tendency of getting obsessed with one author once I start reading it, and then trying to find out different versions and different editions, and how they fit into uh just the general history of people recording what they perceive as important.
Yeah. So just quickly, because I'm interested in my heritage, what was that first account of Ireland being Christianized like?
Well, it's still at this point under a lot of controversy, that some people in Ireland suggest that Orosius was Irish and then um, went into the Mediterranean and met with Saint Augustine, and Saint Augustine told him to bring back the Christian religion to those pagans. And there's other people that think that no, he just heard stories from other people. And so what he says is, in this year, all of a sudden, everybody in Ireland started realizing that Christianity was the way to go.
Yeah. Okay. And did it really? Because the legend says after Saint Patrick converted Ireland, Ireland had a form of unity that helped it thrive a little bit during the Dark Age.
Mhm. Um, it, it definitely is from a Christian point of view, Orosius, and feels, that everything is dark that isn't Christian.
Hmm.
Uh, which is of course a cultural bias.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway, so I found that interesting, and right now, in fact, I'm working on a book that has notes by a probably 16th century author, writing in it what he thinks about where the um, where Orosius, what text Orosius was looking at when he was writing his text, which
Hmm.
is just astounding. That
That is,
from hundreds of years,
wow, that is pretty interesting.
and now, I'm sure that they'd be pretty amazed that 15, 100 years later, I'm still like trying to scratch my head and figure out what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, this is pretty interesting. 1,500 years later, we're still trying to figure it out. Um, so aside from Christianity, were people interested in documenting like myths, legends at all? Have you
Sure.
seen any medical texts from?
Yeah. And um, so one of the things that I'm also interested in is the way that um, medicine and culture come together and take their place. One of the things I have is a book on the secrets of women, that was the authorship is unknown, but it's ascribed to Albertus Magnus, but it was probably from um, an Arabic source, and
Mhm.
then translated in from Arabic into Latin, and then Latin they ascribed it to Albertus Magnus because he was, a highly respected scientist. It would be like saying, I just wrote this text, or I found this text and it must be right because Einstein wrote it. That kind of attribution happens a lot in the Middle Ages, and without copyright, or without even the ability to reproduce a text exactly the way it is. Every time it gets recopied, it gets rewritten slightly because of typos and the eye skips, and just like, I don't like this paragraph, I'm gonna just stop writing and then skip ahead and write some more. And you see text get bigger and smaller as people add things and subtract things. So this the Secrets of Women book is very, very rare, um, in printed editions, It was probably written around 1350, and it was first published in the 1480s ish. And there's probably a dozen copies of the 1480s in the 1480s, and then in the 1490s, there's a few more, and then in the late 90s to the turn of the century to 1501 or so, there's about a dozen copies known worldwide. And that's a book that I've had a couple of, and I just bought another one, so I'm excited about that. And it it mentions um, all all of the contemporary ideas about reproduction and the problems with the reproduction, and chapter by chapter. So the final chapter is like how men produce sperm, but there's chapters on birth control, abortion, creating um, situations where procreation can happen. A short discussion on what they called monstrous births,
Uh-huh.
and which, if you have like a dark sense of humor, it can be quite strange, you know.
Is it their ideas on birth defects?
Yeah, yeah, and also unexplained things, like if a very pale woman has a very brown baby, uh, one of the things they say is she was probably thinking of a slave or a Moor or something like that, and it wasn't that she was like fooling around. So it's sort of like you can see people being let off the hook from some of the uh, social problems, and at the same time trying to protect women, and sometimes not, saying that there was evil witches who would run around and tell women how to prevent birth, and then they had defective children, which is possible, but you know, it's a very, very rich and important social text. Um, I've also been writing a lot of blogs about um, natural magic versus artificial magic, and it's it's a way of like dealing with the relationship between miracles and then just bad things happening, prophecies, and you know, if there's, say, a comet goes through the sky, that doesn't mean it's going to be the end of the world, and walking that line and interrogating that line. And a lot of Jesuits in the 17th century and the 16th century were working on that. um,
So just kind of quickly, what is because I know not everybody watching this is going to know the difference between natural and artificial magic. What during
and I mean, it's a human construct. um, so the things that the church could explain, or the or that natural sciences could explain or hope to explain, well, that's natural magic. Artificial magic is conjuring and being uh
all the stuff that the church would attempt to accuse people of?
right. And right now I have a great book. It's two books, in fact it's two books bound together, and the first book is about places infested with demons, which is a description of locales where you shouldn't go or you're going to run into demons. And as far as, you know, graveyards and things like that. But the number one thing is don't go into caves, don't go underground. There's bad stuff going to happen there. So it's trying to keep people like closer to heaven.
Yeah.
And it's bound with identification of demons and how you know if somebody's a demon or possessed by a demon.
Okay. So that is pretty interesting how they were trying to explain a certain naturally dangerous areas to go to.
Yeah, you want me to show you the book?
Yeah, that'd be cool.
This is Thyreos de Ocessidae, which is the obsession of demonic spirits.
That's really neat. Thank you for sharing that, James.
Sure. And the second part,
And so this was all, so somebody, this looks printed.
yeah, it is. And here's the infestation of molesting demons.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lusting demons. All right. So what time period did people begin to print books?
So printing starts around 1450. The first dated books are in the 60s.
Hmm.
And by 1470, they're printing lots and lots of books. I probably have a dozen books from 1470-ish on my shelf right now.
Okay. So at this time, when people are starting to print books, so beforehand, everybody just wrote it all by hand. Um, so what kind, like, was this an expense? Like, did this make books start to become more affordable for the general public?
Sure. It has a couple effects. It makes them more available and more affordable and more desirable in a certain way. Um, you know, it's I sell books to people who are collectors of things, and a lot of times I run into people that want to collect something that's so rare they're never going to have one.
Okay.
And it was that way with books that, oh, if I have to pay an exorbitant amount to a church to get a Bible, I guess I'll just use the one that's there, or I'll use the one that's online.
Okay. Yeah.
That's what I hear all the time. But once the price came to a level where it was obtainable, more people wanted them, and everybody saw that their neighbor had one. And one of the things that's really neat is that uh, the ability to write a book became much easier too. And you weren't so structured by society. You didn't have to be an uh, authorized a person who was given the authority. Again, it's hard to get around what we really mean by somebody who writes a book, because it was all based in social structure. The
So,
social
so before printing books, you had to have a legal authority to own a book.
or to write one, and to spend all that time writing one and to have somebody copy it, you had to be a professor, or a priest, or a philosopher, or somebody that had a lot of respect,
Okay.
because
So
it was
that's that's really surprising.
well, it's not, if you think of it, it's like writing a blog, as opposed to when I was in college. If I wrote a poem or something like that, it I would have to send out copies of it to journals, and they would have to decide whether they liked it or not. And it was a lot of hard work. Whereas now you can just have your own webpage and publish what you want, without any authority. And
Yeah.
and there's been an explosion of that, and it's sort of hard on the magazines and the publications, but at the same time, it's free for everybody to express themselves. So with printing, that happens, that the number of authors, just multiplies so fast with the availability of printing, and the
So,
subject matter of the books too.
so with the availability of printing, like what are other things that we start seeing come out? Like suddenly does like nonfiction literature start to become popular? Do people write more
Sure.
poems?
So there's lots of poetry. There's lots of devotional texts, which are sort of focused sections of the Bible or sections of religious stories, lives of the saints, biographies become very popular. And even things like sermons become incredibly popular. If somebody's like, down the street giving really interesting sermons, and your priest is not, like, you buy the good ones, and then you decide that you might want to go to a different church or something like that. And that brings up the level of sermonizing, and the same thing with the writing of poetry or histories. Chronicles were, incredibly important. And the devotional books are sort of the backbone of where these stories come in and out, that the Bible becomes a really strong mediator in people's lives when they can bring parts of it home. So books of hours were devotional books that had a prayer that you would say every hour, and usually they were illustrated. And that's another thing, that with printing you can reproduce a good illustration, whereas everybody can have more or less legible handwriting, but to make good illustrations is sort of specialized, and you see lots more illustrations in printed books than you would in manuscripts in general, or repeated exactly the same or similar. It's a book of hours of hourly prayers, and you can see this is metal cut, and that's there's a knight and there's a priest. Oh, so this is David. You can see his name there. So this image will give you something to focus on and be devout about until the next time you come to read the next section. And these, well, here's the printer's device, which is really rare. And this printer only printed a few of these books, but this is really great. So this is an astrological anatomical man. So it's showing a relationship between, is that good?
Yeah, I can see it. I was trying
Yeah.
not to say anything so we can keep seeing your book.
So so this sort of begins, with the body and man's relationship in the world. And then the next thing that happens is you get the calendar, and the calendar mediates your role as a human being in the world by giving you holy days, saints days, and lets you know where you need to fit in and what you need to pray about. And then usually so it begins with then you get the Bible stories, and that's John the Evangelist. But they're really, really ornate. This is printed on vellum, which is animal skin, probably sheepskin.
Mhm.
So you figure a sheepskin is, 3 feet by 2.5 feet. That makes about 8 pages of this book. So, and the book is probably 240 pages divided by 8. You get a lot of sheep that had to give up their lives just to make this book.
Yeah. So is that also part of why some of these old books have lasted so long? Because it's
It
all
is.
leather.
Yeah, so this is sort of newish for me. This is from 1514.
Mhm.
So it's only, 500 years old. But you can look at the condition. I mean, you can read it just like it was written yesterday.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's it's totally cool. I'd
Yeah.
frame some of those pictures and keep them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's what makes them rare, that people would read these until they fell apart, and then as they fell apart, they would frame up the images. So a complete one like this, there's only, besides this one, there's only one other copy in the US, and that's at the Newberry Library in Chicago. And in the rest of the world, there's two others, one in France and one in Germany.
Wow,
So we've got 4 copies of the book.
that's incredible.
Yeah. So I'm excited. This is featured in my blog right now. Um, and I'm trying to find the right person who would really appreciate it. It has one of the most unusual things that I've seen is a rebus prayer in the back. Isn't that great?
Yeah. So could you? So you know what all of those symbols mean when it's
No.
instructed?
I mean, I can guess at it because it says right here what the text is. But so this is like a sou or a sow, a French coin probably, and then a bone, which would be os. So you get salos, which is like right here, which means like honor. So it's pretty cool. But because my knowledge of French images is a little weak, it's not like getting a heifer beer bottle cap and like looking at the inside of that and trying to figure out what it means,
Yeah.
or other places where rebuses are.
Yeah. A little bit
But
more complicated.
yeah, a little bit more complicated, but more to focus you in and pray about it. And a lot of a lot of books were produced and reproduced in order to teach you how to like focus your brain on your relationship with God and spirituality.
That's interesting. So were some of so was there like a general idea to try and prioritize the church with some of these books?
Yeah, I think so. At the same time, the for me, it's hard to separate education and Western thinking without seeing um, the spread of writing through through theology and churches being separate from thinking. So even in Arabic texts that make their way, or pagan texts, the Greek texts, they survive in a way, whether it's positive or negative, with the powers of churches at the time to reproduce the texts. So there's because I'm sort of focusing on this very small period of intellectual history, I get to see the first of this and the first of that very easily. So I have like the first book on working on memory, the first book that's focused on how to create um, devices which will allow you to memorize things. And of course, they always fall back on how to memorize the gospel or how to memorize Bible stories, just because people know those things to begin with. I wouldn't say like, memorize the names of the stars if you didn't know about the stars. But at the same time, in the 1470s, there's books that show you the stars, show you constellations, and teach you how to memorize the constellations. So all of the ideas can like sort of be focused at the church, but at the same time, they're just human human nature to write about everything around there. I mean, there's books on earthquakes, there's books on courtly love, almost everything in this period, but there's always like a tinge of um Catholicism behind it, whether it's for or against it.
Oh, wow. All right, that's really neat. I think maybe we might have to do another one on earthquakes and working memory. That would be pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah. Let's see.
Oh wow, that's cool.
Yeah, so this brings a lot of things we were talking about together. So this is like a memory chart for Dante's travels through hell and the different circles of hell and how to memorize it.
Wow. Were there a lot more when it was first written?
Um, more.
More circles of hell?
Oh no, we just simplify it. So in the circles, he puts in who's mentioned in there. So
Okay.
yeah, so there's like fish and stuff. Fish go to hell. But this book has really beautiful. Oh, this is the first book that has sign language in it. Isn't that cool?
That is so cool. What year is that book?
Um, 1579.
Oh God. And do you know who the author is for that?
Sure. So the title is it's the source of artificial memory. And again, like back to artificial magic,
Hmm.
natural magic, that this
Yeah,
is taking what you naturally have and augmenting it. And the author is Cosimo Rossello, right up here.
that's incredible. That really is.
Yeah, it's a really important book.
Yeah.
And and here's a Chaldean alphabet. And so, you know, the there's a great one. This is a great illustration that it's not like finished yet, but I love that. Um, but ideas are inseparable from a moral impact, and with the moral impact that so it presupposes religion and sharing the ideas, you have to like have a language, and when language is expanded, it becomes memory. And so all of these things like become like this one like um gestalt of ideas moving through culture. And just like now, there's all sorts of stopgaps and all sorts of things that get in the way. And it wasn't us that invented limiting libraries and banning books. We're just copying it. But at the same time, you know, the fact that we're banning books in numerous states in the country brings it right to life that this book um probably would be banned in some places in this country today. It's really frightening to me. Most of the books I sell go to libraries,
Yeah.
and I sell to university libraries. And if I was to offer that to Florida, maybe there'd be something in it they didn't like, like describing parts of a naked body.
Yeah, they'd burn it.
So that's that keeps me like nailed down to the present. And um some states are making it illegal to ban books, which is really cool too.
That is cool. That is.
Ohio just passed a law that they wouldn't give money to schools that banned any books in their library.
That
So
is cool. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, it's interesting too, because I keep finding in history there is a very unique resourcefulness, and keeping it relative to like the 1400s and the medieval era. There's one historian who talked about how at one point there was dress code laws written.
mhm, mhm.
Like the peasantry could, there's only specific things that they could wear that would identify that they were peasantry. And his proposal was um, that it was because they were very resourceful people.
Mhm.
Um, and it's interesting to see like how people are so capable of trying to like make sense and figure out so much.
And it um mastery of the semiotics or the symbols that you use is a form of power. And there's lots and lots of books um called courtesy books on the way to behave and the way to dress and the way to approach and interact with other people uh, through speech and letters. Um, and even today, it's whether you wear a tie or not. In a certain situation, it sort of signals, pre-signals anything that you're going to say next. It's like, I'm the guy with the tie on, so I'm saying this, or and and the signs um, in these memory books or in the books that describe how to behave are very, very blatant and great for us to look back at, 500 years later and say, wow, they were doing the same things that we keep trying to pretend we're not doing.
Today. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, everybody's free today. Whereas back then they all had to like wear ties and carry, briefcases when they went to work.
Yeah. Yeah. Or had to keep themselves covered as close as head to toe as possible, or uh,
Right.
maybe not let their hair be visible out in public.
Yeah, exactly. So, we live in a sort of a golden age of availability of history.
Yeah.
35 years ago, I couldn't just go online and find any text I wanted to and read it. I had to go to the library. I had to have the right to go to the library. I had to go to a special library. I had to even know the languages. Where Whereas now you could go online and find one of these books, take a picture of it and put it into Google Translate or something, and have a translation of it that you can read in about 25 minutes. Whereas 20, 30 years ago, it was like really hard. Um, finding translations of things, finding out which libraries had the books. A lot of times I would have to call libraries and ask them if they had a copy of this book, which now is sort of ridiculous because almost all libraries have online catalogs and you can see exactly what they have.
Yeah.
So we live in if you wanted to search, like, was it okay to wear, you know, uh, shorts, in July in medieval England, it would be pretty doable. And you could probably in 30 or 40 minutes pull up like a archaeological find of somebody found a pair of shorts, from medieval England.
Yeah.
So the books, to me, you know, I think the most important thing for me in my job is just trying to like open my mind up to everything that's possible within that book and try to describe it in a way that somebody can see something in there that they haven't seen before.
Yeah. All right, James. I think that well concludes this interview.
Oh,
Thank
great.
you, and
Good. Thank you. It was fun.